So, you shared the story about your sister, right? And she's a doctor at a government hospital. And wow, it was a really powerful look at the dedication and the long hours and just like the whole idea of sacrifice. And she had this story that really stuck with me.
Yeah, her commitment, is really something, and especially considering all the challenges of working in that kind of environment. And she had this historical story about like the early days of anesthesia that really showed how much she understands the values of her profession.
Yeah, totally. So, for this deep dive, let's try to understand like what drives that kind of dedication and sacrifice in medicine. Like what are the motivations? And we'll look at your sister's experience and that story she shared and see what they tell us.
Sounds good.
Okay, so first, can you tell us more about like what it's like for your sister working at that government hospital you mentioned, the really demanding hours?
Right. Well, the environment's really important. Government hospitals, they often have limited resources, but they serve a lot of people who need free medical care. So
Yeah.
her dedication, it's not just a personal thing, it's also about the system and all the pressure it faces.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you told us about this one time she came home obviously exhausted after like a ton of operations and then had to go right back for an emergency. It just shows how relentless the work is.
Oh, yeah, it's nonstop.
Yeah.
Her and all her colleagues, they're expected to be available all the time and put the patient's needs first. It
Hmm.
seems like that's just like a basic part of being a doctor.
And you were worried about her, you suggested maybe she could delegate some of her tasks. It really showed how much this commitment costs her personally.
Definitely from the outside looking in, delegating seems like a good way to avoid burnout.
Hmm.
But her response showed she had a deeper understanding of her role, as a senior doctor in that system.
Oh, interesting. So tell me, what was her reasoning for pushing herself like that?
Well, she said that all her colleagues were under the same pressure and they all needed a break. But as the senior doctor, she felt like she had to lead by example and take on that burden. She saw it as a necessary sacrifice for the larger interest of the people. And it wasn't just about that one emergency. It was about all the patients the hospital serves.
And then she mentioned that story of anesthesia as like the reason behind her perspective. So that brings us to that historical story you talked about. So take us back to England a long time ago before anesthesia was common.
Okay, so imagine surgery. Back then, it was brutal and terrifying.
Yeah.
Chloroform had just come out, and that let them make patients unconscious, which was huge, but it was still risky and had its limits.
Yeah.
So that's the context for this innovation that your sister talked about.
And the story is about a father and son who were both doctors, right? What were they like?
The father was this famous doctor, really innovative, always looking for better ways to deal with pain during surgery. And his son was young and enthusiastic, and he had this interesting thing. He had 6 fingers on one hand, which becomes important later on.
So the father was trying to find a better way to relieve pain than just knocking people out.
Exactly. He was experimenting with different chemicals to develop what we now call local anesthesia. He wanted to make something they could inject to numb just the area being operated on so the patient could stay awake but not feel pain in that spot.
That sounds like a revolutionary idea for the time, but I'm guessing there were some hurdles to get over.
Oh, yeah, for sure. He had done all these experiments and he was sure it worked, but the next step was to prove it on a real person. Human trials. They had to show it was safe and effective before the medical authorities would approve it for everyone to use. And of course, finding someone willing to have surgery with an experimental anesthetic, that was a tough one.
And that's where the son comes in with a pretty amazing offer, right?
Yeah, he really stepped up. He saw how dedicated his father was, and he believed in his work. So he volunteered himself. He heard his dad should inject the experimental anesthetic into his 6th finger and then remove it surgically, right in front of the Academy of Medical Science. He had 2 reasons for this. One, he'd always wanted to get that extra finger removed anyway. And 2, this public demonstration would prove that the medicine worked because everyone would see him going through surgery without any signs of pain.
Wow, that's really selfless, even if he did want the finger removed to do it in public as a test case with all that pressure.
Absolutely. It was a big risk. And it showed how much faith he had in his father's work and the potential of this medical advancement. So they set up the public demonstration and they invited all these important people, scientists, doctors, even some big names who wanted to see this groundbreaking event.
So can you describe what it was like, the atmosphere, the procedure?
So picture this. You're in the room and there's all this tension. Everyone's waiting to see what happens. The father shows everyone his son's 6th finger and he carefully injects the medicine. And he announces that the operation is starting and tells everyone to watch his son's reaction and get the son keeps a smile on his face the whole time. The surgery is a success and everyone's amazed. They're all congratulating the father on his breakthrough.
So it seemed like a complete success, at least to everyone watching, but there's a twist, right? What happened after the demonstration?
This is where it gets really interesting. So they're alone, and the father is overwhelmed with emotion. He hugs his son and starts crying and confesses something terrible. He was so nervous and in a rush that he forgot to put one of the essential chemicals in the injection. The anesthetic didn't work at all.
Wait, so the son felt everything and he still managed to smile through the whole thing?
Yeah, unbelievable, right? He knew something was wrong during the surgery. He felt the pain, but he understood how much work his father had put into this medicine and how much it could help people in the future. So he decided to hide his pain so his father's experiment wouldn't be seen as a failure.
That's incredible. I can't even imagine having that much strength and self-control. And the father, he realized his mistake during the surgery, but he couldn't bring himself to say anything.
It seems like he was trapped. If he admitted his mistake, it would ruin his whole life's work. Even though his son was being so brave, he had to watch his son in agony, but pretending everything was fine, a silent testament to the potential of the medicine that he thought had failed.
And how did the son react when his father told him what happened?
His response is just incredible. He comforted his father and said, "Father, don't worry for the welfare of others. I controlled my own pain." That one sentence perfectly captures the idea of sacrificing yourself for the greater good.
Wow, your source even mentions that this story might not be completely true, but it shows the same dedication that you see in your sister and her colleagues. And it's easy to see the connection, the son hiding his pain and your sister pushing through exhaustion. It's the same idea.
It isn't both stories, whether they're completely factual or not, they both show this idea that you have to put the well-being of others first, even if it costs you something. The son went through incredible pain for the advancement of medicine, and your sister pushes past her own limits for the health of her patients.
Makes you think about what makes people in medicine so dedicated, what drives them to do these amazing things.
It's probably a lot of things combined, empathy for people who are suffering, a strong sense of duty to help others, and a deep belief in the importance of their work, the idea that they can relieve pain, heal people, and save lives. That can be incredibly motivating enough to make them push past their own limits when they have to.
And there's also this theme of leading by example in both stories. The father, maybe not intentionally when it came to his son's pain, but definitely in his pursuit of medical innovation. And your sister, as a senior doctor, feeling responsible for being on the front lines.
Absolutely. The father's dedication to his research, even though he made that mistake, inspired his son to do what he did. And your sister's dedication probably sets an example for her whole team. It reinforces that shared sense of responsibility and shows how important patient care is.
And when your sister said the larger interest of the people and connected it to that anesthesia story, it really brings it all together. The son's sacrifice, even though only he knew about it at the time, it helped to create a medical advancement that would benefit so many people who would need surgery with local anesthesia.
That's a great point. These individual sacrifices, they have a huge impact. Even though one person bears the burden, the benefits can spread to so many others. The development of anesthesia completely changed surgery. It saved countless lives and reduced suffering so much, and the son's hidden pain, even though no one knew about it at the time, it played a crucial role in that progress.
So looking at these two stories, your sister's experience and the story of the father and son, what can we learn about dedication in medicine?
I think the main takeaway is this deep commitment that you see throughout the medical profession, both today and in the past. It involves putting others first, even if it means sacrificing a lot. Personally, it's a willingness to face hardship, whether it's physical pain or exhaustion, because they feel responsible for helping others and believe in doing good in the world.
It really makes you appreciate everything that people in medicine do, all the sacrifices they make that we don't always see. So thinking about these examples, it makes you wonder what other acts of dedication and sacrifice are happening all around us in different professions, people doing things for the greater good. And what does that tell us about human nature and what we value as a society? It's something to think about, all those quiet acts of commitment that shape our world.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible when you stop and think about it.
Thanks for joining me for this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.